A bright idea in learning and development is on its way. Learning Now TV. Coming soon.
That's what she'd like to be. A lovely heart, but good one to soothe her vanity. She says that I'm her hero because I keep on bouncing back like Play-Doh. But I'm no scarlet woman, would you believe? Oh yes, indeed. Miss Goody Two-Shoes and nobody's fool, living life to a different set of rules. Miss Independent and good old plain Jane, we're not so different, lady. She'd like to take her caution and toss it to the wind.
let's take a look at what's coming up on tonight's programme.
It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Welcome to the show. We've got an absolutely packed programme today. Nigel, can you tell us a bit more about what's coming up?
I'll do my best, Gemma. First of all, Nick Shackleton-Jones is about to launch his new book called How People Learn. And I'll be talking to Nick about the book, why he wrote it, and what are the big insights that emerged from writing it. Then we've got Keith Keating. He's worked with General Motors on building their dealer learning, and he's going to talk about virtual reality amongst other things. And also, Learning Leader of the Year, Louisa Talon, will talk about her philosophy, approach, and some of the things she's achieved in her career. Enjoy the show. This month sees the launch of a very important book. It's called How People Learn. Here it is, right on camera. And I am going to be speaking with the author, Nick Shackleton-Jones, of PA Consulting fame. But Nick, we're going to focus on the book, not about PA Consulting. Why did you write How People Learn?
I don't know. I guess I partly had a frustration. I wrote it actually because it's something that I care about. And I started out, I think, like many people in the industry, trying to solve problems. And there were problems like, how do you design learning so that it's effective? How do you evaluate learning? How do you align your learning with your business strategy? And the more and more I worked on these problems, because I'm a bit of a reflector, the more I realized you can't solve any of those problems without understanding learning. It always sort of heads downwards, if you like, and I became deeply skeptical of the way that we were thinking about learning. And in fact, the fact that most people who work in learning wouldn't easily define learning or be able to tell you kind of what it is or how it works. And so I thought, well, ultimately, if I'm going to help kind of solve those problems, I need to understand how learning works. So it's a book which sets out a new approach to thinking about learning, which should help people with all those kinds of questions.
How did you learn about learning then?
Through a lot of reading. Reading very widely, through a lot of observation, mainly through challenge. I think most people just kind of accept the received wisdom about something. They'll have a theory and they'll say, that's the tool, that's the model we're going to use. It might be Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it might be Kolb, it might be, Honey and Mumford's learning styles. But I began to continually kind of challenge these theories until I could come up with a coherent picture which explained what I was seeing in the world and some of the research that I was reading.
So what is your coherent picture? Can you give us a very quick summary of how you think people learn?
Sure, I'll do my best. And I would say it's hard to kind of overstate how radical a departure this is from the convention. I'm basically saying that since before the time of Plato, we've been wrong about people and about how they work and about how people learn. And perhaps the simplest way of explaining it is you and most of us assume that as we move around in the world, stuff is happening outside of us, and this is causing changes in our head, and that we're somehow kind of storing our experiences. And we sort of know this from Hebb, 1949, the brain continually kind of rewires itself.
Yep.
What the effective context...
Things that wire together, fire together,
neurons
wire together.
Yes, fire together, wire together, yeah. What the effective context model says is that's not happening. You don't actually remember any of the experiences that you're having. What you remember is your reactions to those experiences. And you use those reactions to reconstruct those experiences.
Which is why we kind of reconstruct them slightly inaccurately.
Yeah, so Elizabeth
build a fiction
Loftus, a whole bunch of research around this. But on a very practical, everyday level, you and I both going to go to conferences and we give speeches, and this curious thing happens that you'll talk about a whole bunch of stuff, you have loads and loads of slides, and then people will come up afterwards and they'll say, oh, I really like that bit or that bit. And you realise that everybody remembers different bits of what you said. And some people even remember things you think you didn't say. You say, oh, I don't think I ever said that. But that's what they took away from it. And the reason for that is that what governs our memory is our concerns, the things that we care about. People encode the world according to what they care about. So if you and I are doing a kind of a train journey and you're fascinated by architecture and I'm fascinated by plants, we both sit on the same train, we both look out of the windows, but at the end of it, you can tell a whole story about the different architectural styles and progression, and look at that. And I didn't see any of that, I don't encode any of it, and I can tell you a really interesting story about the different kinds of vegetation and flora and fauna. So in a very important sense, our concerns govern what we remember.
Also, you're saying, aren't you, that you're engaged with the world. We don't go through the world passively and neutrally, observing everything objectively. We are part of what we see, because the way we think of the world and see the world and what we care about, to use your word, determines that reality.
Yes, and this is exactly where education and training and learning have gone horribly wrong.
Yes.
They think that somehow you're a box. So they think, well, we can sit you in a room and we can show you this stuff and it will all go in your head. And they think, well, why isn't it working?
Head equally.
Yeah, and it never works.
No,
it doesn't work if you're doing an e-learning, it doesn't work if you're doing micro-learning. So why doesn't it work? Why doesn't it work? And it's because people will only encode things which matter to them, basically, which are relevant, which respond to kind of their concerns. And so this idea of just kind of decanting information, the idea, as you say, that people are kind of passive absorbers of what happens around them, has fundamentally misled us in being able to kind of design a kind of effective learning. And to come back to a point that was mentioned earlier, the only way you're ever going to design anything effective is to start with what matters to the audience, and that can be called design thinking if you like. But it's frankly incredible that for decades we've come up with curricula, lists of topics, and said,
irrespective of the individuals.
Yeah, I'm just going to push all this stuff at people. And then we're like, oh, why doesn't it work? Well, it's because, did anybody actually talk to anybody who's supposed to be consuming this information? No.
So you're also saying that rather than focus on developing wonderful stuff, you'd be much better off developing wonderful people who are going to learn, i.e. helping them care more about what you're trying to teach them. Because if they care, they will learn. If they care, they will see it. If they care, they will get it.
And this will chime with what people are observing around them, which is there are two grand classes where people care, where they don't, where the people are pulling and where they're pushing. So people Google and YouTube things all the time. It's just plain text. There's no instructional design. Why is that so effective? Why do people Google things? Well, because
they care.
There's a problem. Yeah, you're right. Now I've got to fix this thing, and I want to do this thing. I've got an illness and I want to learn about it. And all of a sudden they're absorbing information. That's pull. So when you do that design thinking, when you do that analysis of your audience, you're basically bucketizing. You're saying, what are the things that they really care about? Because then you can just give them a resource. You just give them something like Google, because they will absorb it.
They care. They will absorb it.
And what are the things where they don't care and we really want them to care? And that might be anything from GDPR through to safety. Or it might be caring more as leaders about coaching. Yeah, absolutely. And there's no point whatsoever in dumping standard operating procedures or information on people. You've got to create an experience which makes them care about something they didn't before. And I think many of us have been sort of tacitly doing something like that for some time. So the model just kind of helps. Yeah, hopefully it's a light bulb moment. People think, oh, right, now it kind of makes sense. Now, so it doesn't fundamentally say, well, you've got to stop doing all of that stuff. But this is when to do this kind of thing.
So we want them to read this book. Yeah. But what 3 conclusions would you want
people to take that will impact on the way they think about learning and the way they deliver learning and perhaps the way they actually learn?
I guess the main conclusion is that you have to put your audience at the heart of the design process. You and I both worked at the BBC, and it's very funny because that was a message I took from the BBC. Always used to talk about, putting your audience at the heart. They never did, of course, but
it's one of the values. The audience is at the heart of everything we do.
But I did take it at heart, and I thought, well, how would things be different if we did that? So that, I think, is the first one. Put your audience at the heart of the design process. And then the other two messages are, think about designing resources that will support performance. The idea of performance support has been around a while. There are lots of people doing great work there. But I think going a little deeper, it's not just a task analysis. It's what do people really care about? Because that's what's driving their use of resources. And the third one is experience design and the value of designing experiences which really change what matters to people, and as a consequence will affect their learning.
So it's visceral. You got to grab people by the heart as well as by the head.
Yeah.
And if you can do that, you'll get them engaged.
Yeah.
And they'll follow it through. Yeah. Good logic. Good stuff. Good book, everyone. So I hope you all read it. Nick, thanks so much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Nigel.
Excellent stuff.
Whoever you are, wherever you're from, you can network with professionals and experts on the award-winning DPG community.
You can choose to look at articles, videos, podcasts. You can look at comments that people have made. I find it my first stop when I'm thinking about L&D. If I have a question or I want to learn more, that's the first place I go.
Just head online and search for DPG community and sign up free today.
Another presentation from the shy and retiring Robin Hoyle. This month he's focusing on micro-learning, and he's looking at a couple of platforms which deliver micro-learning and giving his candid, honest and open views.
Hello. Over the last few weeks I've been looking at micro-learning platforms on behalf of a couple of clients. And generally speaking, when I want to get into looking at micro-learning or other platforms, I like to try and build things within the platform to really get under the hood and understand how this particular platform works, what kind of thing and experience it creates for people. Now, micro-learning is all the rage just at the moment. The Deloitte Human Capital Trends report for 2019 says that learning is a big issue, and that those organisations who are looking at learning and development as part of their corporate strategy are looking at developing material in small doses, digestible chunks. So micro-learning is front and centre of what's going on within the world of learning technologies at the moment. But as I was playing with these two tools, I was interested by how different they were. Although they both call themselves micro-learning, one is essentially a spaced practice tool. It works on the basis that it sends out questions to people, and once you've got the same question twice in succession, it retires that question. So you'll get maybe 3 questions one day and 2 questions the next day, and the following week you'll get another 4 or 5 questions. And randomly it will roll through the number of questions that have been programmed into the system until you've managed to retire all of them. Once you've answered a question, it gives you some more information. So an explainer piece comes up, and that of course is another way of reinforcing the content that you may already have considered or been given. So for things like product knowledge or compliance, then I can see this sort of thing being quite attractive to people. What I'd be really interested though is that if it also had a confidence check system, because very often you answer the question, you get it right, but let's be honest, you maybe guessed a little bit. Be really good to understand which people have got questions right but don't necessarily feel that confident, because that means to me that they're unlikely to apply that knowledge that they have in practice. More interestingly and more importantly, I guess, it also helps us to identify the bluffers. The people who say, yeah, I know what the answers are, I know what's right, but are actually way off mark. Because those individuals are actively dangerous. They will go and do the wrong thing, believing that what they are doing is right, and we need to intervene with those individuals quickly. So some kind of confidence check would add some value. But as a knowledge check piece, As Will Thalheimer says when he talks about learning transfer evaluation method, it's kind of there at tier 3, tier 4. It's checking knowledge and it's doing it after the event. But though that knowledge check is not necessarily linked to improved performance in the workplace. It's just measuring whether or not people have remembered something. Has a purpose, but it's not great. However, this system also does a couple of other things that are quite interesting. One of them is a video response mechanism. So it gives me a scenario and I have to film my response to that scenario, and then that's fired off to my line manager or nominated coach. So that's pretty cool. And also I can comment. So if the question comes up and I've got a burning desire to share my thoughts with the rest of the world, then I can do that. It has leaderboards. It has leaderboard by teams. So those people who need to be competing with something in order to get engaged can get involved that way, and that's kind of quite useful. And I can see why people would kind of quite like the idea of that, if not necessarily the practice. The second platform that I looked at, though, is much more rounded. It's not about question and answer, it's about delivering content to people. But it's delivering bite-sized content, very small pieces, but it sequences them so that you can see a piece of text, maybe a web link, maybe a video, maybe answer a simple question, although the question mechanisms are a bit simplistic to be of any use. But fundamentally, I can send content out to people in short sequences that they can consume on the go. And I suppose in a way that's what I understood micro-learning to be all about when I first came into this. But in actual fact, if you look at some of that material and some of the limitations which the tool puts on you as a designer, we're going back to a learning design mechanism which wouldn't have been that interesting back when I first started creating e-learning programs 20 years ago. So I mean, this is teach, test stuff at best. And some of it, text on screen, maybe it's not a book with the next button, but no, it's a series of articles with the next button. And I'm not sure that that's enough to develop people's competence or to develop people's confidence to go and do things differently and do different things. And if we're not about enabling people to do things differently and do different things, what are we doing? As learning and development professionals, micro-learning may well be micro, but is it learning? Knowing what I should do, knowing what constitutes good practice is very different from committing to be a good practitioner and being able to be judged as such. And I won't really think that this is learning until such time as it's got those opportunities for experimentation, application, implementation, skills development, feedback, learning transfer, and behaviour change. Without those components, maybe this isn't learning at all, it's just adding to the digital noise. And frankly, I don't know about you, but I've probably got enough digital noise already, thank you.
I'm here with Louisa Talon from the West Coast Group. And Louisa also recently won Learning Leader of the Year at the Learning Awards. Louisa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at the West Coast Group?
Sure. So the West Coast Group is made up of a number of businesses. It's an IT distributor. And I joined the company 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago. We didn't have a training function when I joined. We just had external vendors coming in and delivering training to our salespeople, but beyond that, there wasn't a training function. So the last 3 years of my career has been building up the L&D function and kind of transforming our people capabilities in that time.
Brilliant. It sounds like almost like a bit of a startup mentality, sort of starting from scratch.
It is, absolutely. Yeah, a completely blank canvas, starting from the ground up.
And what kinds of challenges did you run into with that?
Oh, where to start, really? The first challenge was the fact that I had to convince a board that L&D has a place in a business which has never had an L&D function. So we've become a £2.5 billion organisation without a training function. So how do you convince them that L&D can make a difference and it's a needed function? So I knew that I had to deliver results quite quickly in order to convince them that I could bring value to the business. Some of the other challenges were we are in a technology business, so technology changes quite frequently. So finding ways in which I can keep up with the technology changes and then translate the knowledge to our employees consistently was also a challenge for me. So they're probably the two key challenges that I faced.
Thank you for sharing. And you mentioned technology. How much of a role does technology play in learning at the West Coast Group?
So initially it was really just about creating a learning culture. So I didn't focus so much about how I delivered the training. It was more about getting people to have a love for training and realise what it can do for their careers and both their kind of personal lives. So that was really my focus for the first kind of year and a half in my role. And then another year of that was simply getting an LMS in place, so making sure fundamentally that we're compliant and we're able to track training records. And then from that, we're now at a point where we can start thinking about more innovative solutions. So, for example, artificial intelligence and augmented reality in our warehouses. So we're now on that next journey, now that we've got to a place where we can say people have a love for training, our managers love what we do, and we've transformed the business.
That's really cool. That's a real mindset shift, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely changed the way in which our business operates. Our effectivity from our staff has increased by 30% since the L&D function was implemented 3 years ago. So I think, that's a great demonstration that L&D isn't just about increasing skills, but you can make people so much happier in the workplace by giving them the right tools and skills to be able to be good at their jobs.
Completely. And it's easy to see why you were recognised as Learning Leader of the Year at the Learning Awards this year. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Very well deserved. Can you tell us a bit more about what it means to you to be recognised as the Learning Leader of the Year?
Oh my goodness. So I've been in learning and development nearly 18 years now. So I've really strived to be Learning Leader of the Year. It was my penultimate goal in life, really. So I knew that would have to come with a lot of hard work and demonstrating a strong career. So for me, it felt that I finally had recognition for hard work, but also hopefully the innovation that I bring to learning and development. I truly believe that a learning professional should be able to create their own innovative solutions, and I feel that I do that daily in the workplace. I try to be different, so I think that was probably another contribution. But I think my persistence in my career has also been a key factor, because I think typically learning and development, we feel that we always have to continuously prove our worth. ROI is such a buzzword for us. How do we demonstrate our ROI? How do we do that? So I feel that over the breadth of my career that I've always been able to show ROI in a way that speaks to the board or my manager, or to the organisation. So yeah, I think it's an accumulation of those things.
Yeah, and I think that commerciality is something that is missing from a lot of L&D functions. So it's great to hear you talk about that in that way. What do you think is next for you after receiving such an accolade? Where do you go from there?
Probably for the next year, I'll just be working on some of the exciting innovations we've got going on at West Coast through technology, our technology innovations that we're working on. And then after that, who knows? I've certainly not hung up my hat yet, but I just feel that I've achieved such a milestone in my career with winning the Learning Leader of the Year award. So I feel like I can take it a bit easy now.
Rightly deserved, and congratulations again. And just finally, what tips would you have for anyone out there who's aspiring to be a future learning leader?
Oh, well, a number of things. The first thing is become a scientist. And I say this to my team all the time. They look at me like, are you crazy? What do you mean? And what I mean by that is become forensic about the business you work for. Get under the skin, ask the questions, the brave questions that people aren't asking. Because normally it's the awkward questions that really tell you something about your organisation or a function that shows you what the real issues are that we can address. So sometimes it's not just about reaching the vision of the organisation, but what's actually happening under the skin for the people and the culture there. So become a scientist, become forensic is really key for me. The second thing is be persistent. So if you are faced with a challenge where people don't believe L&D can add value and it's just a tick in the box for compliance or for induction, show them that actually you can transform an organisation if you do all the right things and you listen to your business and you listen to your employees and what they need. Be true to the culture of the organisation you work for in anything you do. I think it's so key. And I guess finally is be creative. Don't be scared to try something new. You don't always have to go for that book on the shelf that you've used for years. Just think about how you can add your own mark to methodology and how you can really test it and push it to the limits, really. So, and finally, my final bit would be build yourself a great team, a team that portrays your brand, whatever that brand might be for that particular organisation, and a team that is genuinely passionate about what they do. So they would be my top 5 tips.
Brilliant advice. Thank you so much, Louisa. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you today, and congratulations again on the award.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you.
In the L&D world, we all know our biggest challenge is knowledge fade and demonstrating ROI from our training interventions. At Elephants Don't Forget, we use artificial intelligence to guarantee that what you train your employees, they learn and retain. If you are looking to transform the impact your training content has in your business, improve the ROI, and perhaps help employees learn and retain even the dull regulatory material, drop me a line at nelly@elephantsdon'tforget.com.
I'd like to welcome back Martin Cousins to look at yet another fascinating research report. And this one we actually looked at last year. So this is the new version of the Edelman Trust Barometer. Why is it interesting, Martin?
I think it's just one of those topics that may not feel like it's a part of the L&D
but it
world.
Is. But read my book, Martin, read my book. Trust is critical.
But I think so. I think, all our relationships depend on it. And I think at a very basic level, it runs through everything we do. And it's an opportunity to just look at some research that sits outside of the domain.
Yes.
But I think actually can really provide some useful thinking about what we're doing, the context in which we're working and how our organisations are functioning.
What is it telling us?
So, well, it tells us quite a lot. I mean, it's the 19th year of this report, 30 plus thousand respondents, 27 countries. It's a massive piece.
Huge, yes.
And this year, every year they theme it based on a key sort of theme that comes out of the research. And this year it's trust at work.
Right, which is directly relevant.
I mean,
directly relevant for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought it was quite interesting because they measure trust across lots of organisations like NGOs,
Yes.
business,
Yes.
Media, and the government. And basically,
conclusions
it's
all incredibly high. Loads of trust.
Well, no, it kind of there's always a different picture
Yes.
every year, but trust is kind of
slowly increasing.
It's slowly increasing, but it's what's happening underneath that sort of trend line that becomes more interesting, and I think of more interest to anyone in L&D.
Yes.
Because this idea of trust in the workplace. Becoming the workplace is the most trusted. Basically, my employer is the most trusted relationship, followed by relationships with NGOs and then business, and then the media and the government after that.
Yes.
So actually, by a long shot, the employer relationship is it's the
important,
most trusted relationship.
And people
all
are
those
looking to
institutions.
employers.
Yeah.
To give them some certainty and to give them some grounding, I guess, in the world.
Yeah, that's exactly. Employers are trusted to provide certainty and reliable information on the big issues such as the economy and social issues. That is amazing, really.
It is.
And of course, we probably don't think of ourselves like that in organisations in that way. The senior team might, but actually, this has got quite a big bearing on what the senior team might be doing.
It gives an agenda because that creates a massive opportunity for organisations to forge a different kind of relationship with their employees.
Yeah.
The issue is whether they will take up that mantle.
Yeah.
And they will go make progress on that area.
So I think a really interesting area here is around talent management, actually,
Yes.
because I think that's where it really does butt up against L&D.
Yes, indeed.
So employee expectations are, for the organisation, for working for people, is around shared action is really important. So my employer has a great purpose and my job has a meaningful societal impact, 67%. Personal empowerment. I know what's going on, I'm part of the planning process, I have a voice in key decisions. The culture is values driven, 74%.
Wow.
Now, if that's got nothing to do with L&D,
I agree with you
wheel me
entirely.
out now.
This stuff is really powerful,
yeah.
and it's a great lesson for people to take on board.
Yeah.
That's what people want, essentially. They want to believe this stuff. They want to be values driven. They want a purpose at work. Yes.
But the number one employee expectation is around job opportunity.
Yes.
For 80% of respondents. My employer offers wage growth, training, career growth, and work which I find interesting and fulfilling.
There you have it. In a way.
Yeah.
And that is the route to productivity. That is the route to engagement.
Yeah. Now these are really kind of complex areas to have an impact. But I think when a research report like this, which has nothing to do with L&D and learning, is actually throwing up the fact that employees really do care about the relationship between them and their employer, and also what they can provide them around how they see the world. I think this is really important stuff.
I agree with you.
Especially at a time, because the report also looks at things that concerns of employees, and automation and job loss fears are really rank highly, and so does the need for training and reskilling. So people really want that, and at the same time they're concerned they're going to lose their job to automation. So really interesting.
Fascinating. And I think you're doing everyone a great service in drawing attention to this report, because for most people in L&D it will just go under the waterline. They won't necessarily see it. But like all the reports that you bring to us, you would urge, and I would urge people to download this report. Every report you bring is freely available. And Edelman do a huge amount of work on this report every year so that it's valid data and valid conclusions.
The one thing I would say, when we talk about impact, so my final point would be they talk about the trust advantage.
Yes.
So the benefit of that trust. And for employee-employer relationships, if they are trusting, then there's a massive increase in advocacy for the company, loyalty to the company, engagement with what's going on, and commitment. Now, they're all the areas that we are working on.
Yes.
And
yes.
so that's where trust fits in, and that's why this is really important.
And that's why it's at the heart of everything.
Yeah.
And you, incidentally, you will not get a learning culture without trust. It's fundamental. So this stuff is really valid, and everyone should read it. Yeah. And I'm really grateful for you drawing my attention to it. I thoroughly enjoyed this report.
Great.
Thank you, Martin. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Studies have shown that learning programs are now crucial weapons in the fight to attract and retain talent. Working closely with modern learning organisations across the globe, we have developed Learning Programs of Excellence, a prestigious award recognising exceptional, state-of-the-art learning programs. If you're a learning department or function, LPE will help you attract new talent. You'll boost your appeal as an employer by showcasing the calibre of your learning programs and development opportunities within your organisation. If you're a provider of learning, LPE gives you an absolute guarantee that your learning programs are capable of creating a lasting positive effect on performance and business outcomes. Get in touch with the Learning and Performance Institute now and begin your Learning Program of Excellence journey.
And now we have Ewan Semple continuing his series on how people use technology for personal development. This time, Ewan's going to be focusing on different people's perspectives of automation and how that's going to impact personal development.
So I thought it would make sense to film my second video for this series in my truck. Well, not my truck. It's a truck that I'm driving today. When I'm not consulting or speaking or traveling the world doing keynotes, I drive trucks. And the reason I'm filming in here is that it's one of the archetypical areas of work that people anticipate being automated. And, clearly there are manufacturers, I've worked with Volvo in the past, and they have already run convoys of, I think it was 6 trucks from Gothenburg down to Brussels, with, I think, drivers in the front and the last of the trucks, but the ones in between running on automated systems, sat-nav and various others. And I think Mercedes have done something similar in the UK. But having spoken to people involved in artificial intelligence and in automated vehicles, especially one chap who used to work for the military in America, he was saying that while you still have what you might call a mixed economy, where some vehicles are still being driven by drivers, then the amount of computational power it takes to replace the intuition and the experience that a normal human driver might have is massive. And when people talk about having electric self-driving cars completely autonomous, then, as he put it, you'll flatten the battery in half an hour. Now, that might be an extreme statement, and there are clearly degrees of autonomy and degrees of automation in this field. But it does look as if some of the claims of automation have been overstated. The second, much more personal thing is, having driven big trucks in and out of very small spaces, I think for the last bit of any journey, even in the foreseeable future, there will be some need for drivers. So the reason I'm raising this is partly the personal connection that I have, but also just in the context of people's perspectives on automation. And I think that in terms of repetitive, bureaucratic, process-oriented jobs, office jobs, that there are strong signs that we will automate far more than we do at the moment, and probably much quicker than most people expect. And this is largely because we are nowadays digitizing everything. Most of our documentation is in a digital format. Increasingly, most of our communications are in a digital format. And so any machine learning systems that are pointed at those increasingly vast stores of data have so much more to work on in terms of being able to analyze that data, work out what might be an appropriate next step, and whatever. And that scope, I think, is going to creep upwards. So I was doing a keynote in Australia to a group thinking about workplace of the future, maybe about 60 people in the room. And I had come from a conference recently where they've been showing us how you might use chatbots in the context of HR. So rather than phoning a call center or trying to find a document, you could use a chatbot to answer questions and narrow down your search to find the appropriate document or whatever. And when I asked this audience whether they would prefer to be in constant contact with a chatbot or their current line manager, more than half the room put their hands up for the chatbot, which, as people have said, is more of a comment on management than technology. But it does indicate that people are already becoming comfortable with interacting with technical systems, even up to the level of some of the more mundane activities of management. So I think that the prospects of increasing automation are significant. The challenge is going to be that affects what would previously have been classed as knowledge work jobs, the white collar jobs that many people aspire to, that many have built careers around, will look increasingly fragile over the next 10, 20 years. And I would include in that training and learning. Bots will begin to see patterns in what people learn, how they learn, what they know, what they don't know, and increasingly fill the space with technology and automation. Which is not to be overly gloomy. I think ultimately we still have, as human beings, incredibly unique skills, as it were. That sounds like a gross understatement. But I think if we are able to encourage people to be creative, thoughtful, communicate with each other, in some ways do all the things they've been trained not to do in the workplace, then their roles or their jobs will be safe in the increasing challenge of automation. But I think it's certainly an issue that learning folks should be thinking hard about, both in the impact on their own work, but also in the impact of the algorithms that will steer these tools on their organisations. And I think there's a large piece of work in education to help people understand what's increasingly going to be happening to them. So, as I say, goodbye from today's truck, and I hope you've enjoyed this 5-minute item, and look forward to seeing you again.
Happy workplaces can transform organisations. Research shows they're more productive, more innovative and more profitable. One of the telecom clients we worked with reports that not only do their sales and profits go up as a result of working on creating a happy workplace, but their share price tripled over 2 years. We can help you create a workplace like that. Our 4-day programme spread over 6 months will help your managers and leaders create that kind of culture. Check out the details below at happy.co.uk.
I'm very pleased to be talking to Jenny Marshall. Jenny works for QA in their Leeds office and is the Learning Programme Director in one of their divisions. Jenny, first of all, tell me which division is it you work in, and then tell me, what does a Learning Programme Director actually do?
Thank you, Nigel. Well, I work within the leadership, management and behavioural skills part of the QA business, and my job as Learning Programme Director means that I look after client development programmes predominantly, so I get involved with helping scope the learning need for the client. I'm then involved with designing the programme and bringing that to life for the learners, and then with the rollout to get it out to learners so that their bums are in the seats in the classrooms and they're ready to go.
So you're in charge of everything, basically, from meeting the client, scoping the learning, designing the learning, rolling out the learning. Is there anything you don't do?
I do have some really great people that I work with, actually, who do kind of the solutions design. We've got people working behind the scenes to schedule what's going on, to sort all of kind of the hard materials that come with the sessions. And then we've got a team who go out and deliver it as well, which I sometimes get involved with, but we leave that to kind of the expert facilitators.
Yes. Tell me, what is the content? Is it sometimes online? Is it always online? Is it sometimes face-to-face? Is it a mixture? How do you put those programs together?
It's a mixture, and I think there's more drive to get the digital element in there. We've definitely seen more of a move to the whole flipped classroom methodology. However, we're not doing a true flipped classroom because we still think learners are still struggling to be able to do everything up front, to be able to then come to their event and kind of experience it. So
it's a tipped classroom rather than a flipped classroom?
A little bit, yeah, absolutely. Okay. So we kind of give them some things up front to be able to do that we deliver digitally, whether that's little quizzes, learning about themselves, some little videos to watch, bring things to life in the training room, and then a lot more of the digital stuff after the session, once we've got them engaged and they want to go back and refresh their knowledge. So I'll get involved with selecting those digital modules, tools, developing those with our team of digital specialists, and again using some of the great stuff that's out there on the internet with things like TED Talks, for example, different WebExes, different blogs, and just things to kind of get learners excited about what they're doing.
What's changed over the last maybe 3 or 4 years when you've gone out to clients across that whole time? Have their needs changed? Have their expectations changed? Have their demands on you changed?
I think there's definitely a slight more way towards not doing the 9-to-5 things. So we know we want to get learners engaged and wanting to learn. There's definitely more of a slant towards the digital as well, about how can we help people embed this after they've been into the training room. So what can we give them to reflect and think, yeah, that was really interesting, I want to kind of build on that. So there's definitely more of a learn towards digital, and definitely starting to lean towards a more 24/7 approach to learning, so we can provide in-the-moment learning when people think, I'm going into a meeting, I just want to refresh my skills on what I'm doing, how can I get access to that content? So definitely more of a push towards that as well.
What makes you excited? Is it to do with analysing the needs? Is it doing a design that really gets the client going? Or is it seeing the final product rolling out? Where's your focus that really makes you wake up in the morning going, wow, yes?
There's a couple, I think, for me, Nigel, and I absolutely love my job. I love to develop learning. I think learning has to be what I like to call sticky. It has to be something that somebody thinks, I get that quickly, I can relate to it, and I can start to make a change pretty much straight away, rather than I'm going to have to muse over it for a few weeks. I think the things that really get me going on a morning, I think there's 2 things that really kind of give us a buzz, and we're quite lucky in our industry that I think we get this. And the first is where you develop an event or a learning programme, and then you sit and see the facilitators bring it to life, and you see the light bulbs going off on people's faces, and just the little things of, wow, I didn't know that. I can do something with that immediately. There is nothing better than the buzz that you see from that. And I think the second thing for me is when you talk to delegates either immediately at the event, or even when you bump into them a few months later and they say, that one thing has really stuck with me, and I can hear you on my shoulder or the facilitator, and you get a real kind of stab of pride that you've helped influence the change that they want to make back in their lives and their workplace.
Now, if someone is listening to this interview and say, I wouldn't mind being a learning programme director, what do you need to do the job? What did you do before it, for example?
I think, like many people in this industry, nobody ever sets out going, I want to be in learning.
That's true.
I'd want to be a trainer.
Yes.
We all started somewhere else. My
Yes.
background was finance, and
Yes.
and kind of fell into the learning and development industry through default. And I think for me, it's about gaining the experience. So people that want to move into this industry, I kind of think, well, find ways to talk to people and engage people in learning, even if that isn't your job. We've all got opportunity to be able to kind of excite people and learn something. So start to get exposure to that. And I cannot recommend enough how much, just keeping on top of what's going on in the industry, the learning. You don't have to read big business books. There is plenty of technology out there to give you a highlight of things, different videos to kind of keep you learning. And I think that's crucial for people in our industry, that we keep learning as well.
What keeps you in touch then? Give me a couple of blogs, reports, people that make you feel like you're on top of it all.
I think for me, Twitter has been a revelation, because I can get to things very quickly, and I can think, oh, that's brilliant, I'll just read that, I'll read that. So different blogs. I think there's a lot of good information coming through the Learning Performance Institute, the Institute of Leadership and Management, the Chart Management Institute, all different things that we can kind of keep in touch, and different kind of things that we can
curate for yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then I think, there's some of the more digital companies out there where we can just get information really fast. So we're stood in the queue at the coffee shop, and we can just get onto our smartphone and go, oh right, yeah, I forgot about that piece there, I'm going to use that today. So I think it's just tapping into what works for you, be it a book, a blog, or a video.
Give me 3 tips. Give 3 tips to someone in your position or close to your position to make them do their job as good as you can do the job.
I think the first one, you've got to believe in yourself. You've got to know that you've got all of the resources inside you, and you just need those unleashing. So I think self-belief is key. I think secondly is absolutely tap into your peers and those around you, because as an industry, we have phenomenal knowledge between us. We don't know everything, so tap into those people that can really support you. And I think the good old network. It's not what you know, it's who you know. And I've been able to grow kind of my network and my learning and my passions through being in touch with people I would never have met if it wasn't through things like Twitter and different organisations to bring us together to share our ideas.
3 great tips.
Thank you.
And I hope people pay attention to those.
Brilliant, me too.
Jenny, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I think QA is very lucky to have Jenny Marshall as their Programme Learning Director.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We love being able to engage with people who are not UK based. And today I'm fortunate enough to be able to talk to Keith Keating. Keith is the Senior Director for Global Learning Strategies at GP Strategies, based in the US. So welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
I'm glad
it's
you
great to be
managed
here.
to find us deep in the English countryside.
It's beautiful.
First question, what does a Senior Director in Global Learning Strategies actually do?
Good question. A bit of everything. So I focus on helping clients understand and design and execute their global learning strategies. That's a mouthful. So at the heart of everything I do is problem solving, and specifically focus on helping learners with their performance support challenges.
Okay. And you're interested too in using technology to deliver for you.
Absolutely.
And you've got a bit of a reputation as being someone who's done some pretty groundbreaking work with technologies. So I know there's a lot of things we could talk about, but I really want to focus on maybe 2 or 3 things. First is virtual reality. Mm-hmm. Second is augmented reality. And the third is 360-degree immersion. Because I think they're very interesting technologies, challenging to deliver successfully. Mm-hmm. So my first question is, what are the criteria for successful delivery from your point of view? Is it knowing a lot about the technology, knowing a lot about the issue, knowing a lot about the team? How do you make that a success?
The most important is our learners. And that's what we have to keep in the forefront of everything that we do. So there are so many new technologies coming out every day, whether it's an app, it's a new platform, it's a new vendor. It can be overwhelming. And so we almost have this shiny object syndrome where, let's go try this and that. And I find that a lot of companies are doing that, and especially a lot of clients as well want. They hear something new and they want that.
Yeah, give me it. I read about this.
Yes.
Give it to me, Kate.
Yes.
Yeah.
But is that what the learners need? Is that going to actually solve their problems? And so to answer your question, the first piece is making sure that the learners are in the forefront of everything that we do and that we keep them engaged throughout that entire process. So it's not just identifying virtual reality or augmented reality, but it's making sure that it solves their performance support challenge.
So you're kind of the broker on behalf of the learner, in a sense. Is that fair? Is that a fair statement?
I think part of my role is to understand all of the vendors that are out there, understand the platforms and technologies, and help, as you said, be that broker between the existing and new technologies and the performance support challenges, and looking for the right ones to really marry together to help our learners.
Yes, and that is a very important role, because often the company can't do it, the learner can't speak for themselves. So someone has to be that person in the middle, and someone who's confident dealing with vendors. So you're not going to be browbeaten or conned or sold something that's not going to work. That's your job. So you get it in the neck if it doesn't work.
Yes.
Which is fair enough. Can you give me an example? Give me a practical example of that in action.
Sure. So with a number of clients right now, virtual reality is becoming very popular. Yeah. And the great thing about VR is it's more affordable and accessible. So now you have the Oculus Go, which is under 200 pounds. And then taking augmented reality, for example, it's on all of our phones. If you have purchased a phone in the past 2 years, the development kits that they include now make augmented reality available on all of our phones. So it's almost less about even needing vendor support at this point, because we as learning development leaders have access to these toolkits that allow us to create these solutions for our learners at the moment. So it's just making sure, again, that we're focusing on, is that going to actually solve their problem? I'll give you an example. we often think that apps are the right solution. And if we have an app, it's going to go on their phone and they're going to be able to use it, and it's going to provide performance support. And so recently we had, and I say we as in the learning development leaders, thought there's this great app. We like this. Let's go ahead and try it for our users. And what we uncovered was that learners are being overwhelmed with having to download apps. There's an app now for everything. And so they didn't want to download that app. And so we have to constantly be engaged with our learners and put ourselves into their shoes and really be empathetic with what it is that they're learning, but not just in how they learn, in the way they learn. And so the idea is we do want to have this mobile first approach so that we're delivering learning to them in that moment of need, but we also have to be cognizant in the way that we're doing that. And are we forcing them from a push or pull situation where they're having to go out, download a new app? Does that mean they have to have internet service to be able to use that app? So these are all things that we have to take into consideration.
Give me an example of using virtual reality. So I absolutely love the Oculus Go. To me, it's a step ahead from the Rift, which you had a tethered with a horrible, huge computer behind you. It was really limiting. The Go is an amazing piece of kit. How have you used that to solve a learning problem and convince the users that this piece of plastic on their head is quite a good idea?
So if you think about health and safety, or you think about the automotive industry, there are challenges that you're going to have where you're not going to necessarily be able to recreate that specific instance. So for example, a nuclear power plant. We want to train the individuals there to be able to take the plant offline in case of emergency and bring it back online. So we're able to recreate that situation for them in the virtual reality world, in that Oculus Go. Another example is training on health and safety for either nurses or doctors before they actually get to the patients. In the automotive world, we're using it to give our learners experiences into the vehicles, also from a safety perspective. If you want to see how the airbags deploy, you're obviously not going to crash the vehicle, so you want to still immerse yourself in that experience. The reality is, the use for virtual reality is endless. There are, every industry, any type of role that gives you that opportunity to create these environments and these experiences that you wouldn't necessarily have access to. Another great option is when you've created it one time and you've put it into the Go, you can then share that. And so you're able to reduce the number of potentially in-classroom training you need to have, because that's one of the most costly challenges with training, is the time and the money associated. You create it once, you then pass the Oculus Go around, and you're able to train multiple people with that one single investment cost.
Yes, that's true. And what is the reaction? Have people found it as seductive as I've found it, working in that environment, or are there challenges in persuading people that it is as real as almost as reality?
I would say from my experience, everyone is very open to the idea. That some of the challenges you're going to have is the actual device itself, because it does impact your vision a little bit. And so if you're wearing glasses or contact lenses, that's something you have to take into consideration, as well as the time that you're wearing that device. You don't want to have somebody wearing that over probably 20, 30 minutes just because it's going to impact their vision, even temporarily, could cause a bit of headaches. So these are all real scenarios that we have to think of when we're creating the training situations. And so what we look at is to have 15 to 20 minute intervals with each training approach.
And that works, in your experience?
It does. I think from a learning leader perspective, I love it because it allows us to access our learners around the world without having to physically go places or have them physically join us.
Yes.
Another example is we're starting to use it with clients where they might have a physical space where they need people to go, like it's a command center, for example. Rather than flying people into that command center, we can create that in a virtual world. And what's phenomenal with this next level of VR right now is interactive VR. So it's not just me having my single experience. We can now design
You're in a domain.
Exactly. So you and I can be in there together.
Yes.
We can have a third person who's actually facilitating that activity. So it's really beautiful the way that we're evolving and being able to create these environments.
Where next for you? What are the big things that excite you going forward? We'll finish on that. Give us 2 or 3 examples that really get you going that you haven't necessarily fully worked through at the moment.
I think one of them is the 360-degree experience. So what I love where training is going is this idea of experiences. And that's really what we want to give. You know, when you read a book, you remember the storytelling. When you go somewhere, you remember that experience. And now that we're marrying the storytelling and the experiential learning together, I think that is exciting for us to be. We're moving away from more of the brick and mortar LMS type approach, and we're creating learning opportunities for learners at their moment of need on their mobile devices. So I think the evolution of that is wonderful to be a part of that. And I think the second piece for me is constantly being focused on the learner. And for that, I turn to design thinking, and it's something that I'm truly passionate about and believe in. And I feel that is a wonderful process, methodology for us to be able to stay connected with our learners so that when we're developing these solutions for them, we don't find out at the end of that 3 or 6 months that we developed the wrong solution. Exactly. They're on that journey with us, and we're uncovering within the first 2 or 3 days, hey, that's not the right approach. That's not the right problem we're trying to solve. And so we have that empathy where we're constantly attached to our learners, and that's what we need to remember and stay focused on. And that's what, to answer your question, I'm very passionate about right now, is making sure that from an industry perspective, that we are staying focused on our learners.
Yeah. So new technologies require new methodologies, new approaches, but the learner is still at the heart.
Absolutely.
Of it. Keith, it was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's the end of another packed show. We've got tons of events coming up in the learning calendar over the next couple of months. Nigel, what's in the diary?
Well, I'll just highlight 3, Gemma. The first is CIPD's Festival of Work in June. And then in July, we have 2 events that you should note in your diary. The first is the Learning Technology Summer Forum, and the second is a Women in Learning event. Both of those will be in London.
Great, and we're always looking for new stories here on the show, so if you've got a story to tell, or you've got a great idea, or there's just something you want to hear about, please get in touch and let us know.
See you next month.